All right, we're not going to be we'll get back to Matthew next Sunday, and we're going to be in James chapter 1. This is a message that I preached about 2 years ago, and the Lord laid it on my heart actually several weeks ago, probably about, I've been known I was going to preach this for probably 3 weeks at least right now. James chapter 1. We're going to be looking at the verses 2 through 4. James chapter 1, starting there in verse number 2. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. Let's go ahead and pray. Again, Father in heaven, Lord, I love you. Lord, I do thank you for your word. Lord, I thank you for the wisdom and the comfort and the strength and how it feeds us. And Lord, I pray this morning, Lord, I pray that you bless and it would be a help to us, that you use it to strengthen us and draw us closer, Lord. Please work, even in spite of me, Father, I beg you that you would work. Please, Lord. And again, pray that you'd fill me with your Spirit, Lord. I love you, and I pray this in Christ's name. Amen. Again, I preached this as we went through the series on James on Wednesday nights. This was really, the next several verses go together. We can almost call this part one of a three-part message. I don't think I'm going to be preaching the other messages. This is the only one of the three that was put on my heart at the time. So again, I plan on being back in Matthew chapter 19 next week. But anyhow, as we dive into this, me and Bob were talking, I don't know, 3 or 4 times since I've been back, about when trials and different tribulations come up in your life, of being able to actually get to that place to count it all joy, as the Bible commands here. It's an imperative that is given here, to be able to count it all joy when going through times of suffering, when going through times of trials, and to get to that place. And I believe that these verses here in James are critical to it. I believe they show us the steps to allowing that to take place in your life. When you join the military, when I entered the Air Force, it was August 1st of 1989. I entered the Air Force and headed off to basic training. And it wasn't like I was waiting for it. I had all of about a day's notice, really, when I left. I did not even know I was going in the military till Saturday, and I left on Monday. It was literally that quick. Everything was done. That's counting all paperwork, anything like that. I had no idea I was going to be leaving for the Air Force. I didn't even talk to him till that Friday, and that was a no-go. Saturday, he had called back and said I could leave Monday, and I agreed to it, so I left. And again, I remember waiting to leave before they took us in a bus to the airport from the MEPS building, and there was an officer there who was talking with us and trying to put everybody at ease, and he was asking, all right, who's going to the Marines, who's going to the Army, things like that, and it was pretty good. He made fun of everybody that joined the Marines for joining the Marines, and went through each one. He finished with the Air Force, and he was not Air Force himself. Remember, he was an Army officer, and he had said for the Air Force, he said, I don't need to talk. Just bring your golf clubs. That's all you're going to need when you guys go to basic training. And he was right. That was about right. But anyhow, all the different services. My brother went in the Navy. I remember his training was just basic training. We're not talking the additional training following basic, that'll get much more involved and much more advanced. But for the Air Force, the basic training was just about 6 weeks at that time. My brother was in the Navy. I think it was 8 weeks for him. I think at that time Marines was 12 or 13 weeks if you're in the Marines. And I think the Army is as long as you're in. I think that's permanent. But anyhow, all were different because of the different mission requirements. Because what you were going to face, that's what they based your training on. That's what they based basic training on, and then that's what they based the advanced training afterwards. It would be what would be required of you, what they would put you through. I know in the military, the most probably the most popular and most grueling training is that of Navy SEALs. It is without a doubt some of the most intense training that is done for any military in the world. And I remember when I was preparing this message, I read a lot of different articles, a lot of different things about that, about what they went through. And the one that caught my attention the most was happened right during the very beginning of the training. And this is after they already went through a series of processes just to get to this place, but they had 5 days, a time of testing near the very beginning of it. And every single one of them know that it's coming. They basically even know exactly when it's going to start, because it always starts at the exact same time. It starts on a Sunday night. It's during the next 5 days, they're going to get a total of about 4 hours of sleep is what they're going to average during the, not each day, over the next several days. That's about all that they're going to average. It's going to be very grueling physically and mentally of what they're going to go through during this week. At any time during this 1 week, there's always going to be a bell present that they can ring. If they ring the bell, it's over with. They're done. It ends it right there, and it's through it. By the time they finish that 5-day time frame, there will only be 25% who have not run the bell. The other 75% will have run that bell and have ended that training. However, of the 25% who make it through that week, almost 100% will finish the rest of the 6 months of training that is involved. They'll almost have 100% finish. Again, it starts off late on a Sunday night each time. They'll have men busting through the door, firing different machine guns, at least with the sounds of it, it's going to be blanks. They're given instructions during all this chaos that's taking place. Then as they come outside, they're going to be hit with a blast of hot water from a cannon. There's going to be sounds of artillery fire taking place as they exit the building. There's going to be explosions that are deafening. They try and create an atmosphere of total chaos from the very beginning to see how they respond. There's small arms fires. Instructors are shouting commands of what they need to do, and they need to be able to hear those commands and follow them perfectly. Again, to quit, you just have to ring the bell. The week is filled with brutal situations. You can read about some of them, of what they're going to go through during the training. Again, to quit, just ring the bell. That's all you have to do. Again, they are preparing them and training them for what lies ahead. They know the possible missions that these men will have to face. They know they're going to be in situations that are going to be at times completely chaotic. That's going to go against everything that they plan, and they have to know how to respond. So they're trying to prepare them as best they can for those situations. They're trying to prepare them for what lies ahead. Remember, there's not a single one of these men who enter this that don't know what's coming starting that Sunday night. They all know it's going to hit. I'd imagine all of them read the same material that I read. And they've already went through a pretty good process just to get to this point in the training. And again, it's all preparation for what lies ahead of what they're going to go through during that week, and really during the entire 6 months. And the fact is, we are in a spiritual battle. The Christian life isn't an easy one. I remember Lester Roloff used to always say, it's not a playground, it's a battlefield. It is a battlefield. And the Lord does put us through different things to strengthen us, to help prepare us. And He can even use different things in our life to that end. They can serve as times of preparation. Again, our battle is not flesh and blood. Our battle is a spiritual battle. God needs to prepare us and strengthen our faith so that we can be used of Him, so that we can accomplish His will. So God will put us through trials in life so He can perfect us, He can mature us, He can make us complete. And it's not necessarily that He always puts us through it, although He certainly does do that. It's how He can choose to use the trials in life. Again, we'll all face different levels of trials. Don't allow the level of trial that you're facing sidetrack you from how God can use it. In our text, God gives us 3 imperatives to do during times of trials. That's what we're going to look at today. He shows us the results of those trials if we'll allow God to use them the way that He can. If we follow these, we certainly can live above our circumstances and not allow them to control us. We've all heard the expression that when life hands you lemons, you make lemonade. Well, what these verses do is show you how to make lemonade. That's what it's doing. It's trying to take something that is tragic or that is a trial in your life and trying to allow God to use it for a whole other purpose than what you even realize. And the fact is, I could take time, I won't do it. That'd be a whole other message, and I probably will do that one of these days. We could take a time and go back and look at when the nation split Israel, northern and southern kingdom, whether it was Babylon or whether that was the northern kingdom of Israel, or the southern kingdom of Judah or the northern kingdom of Israel. The Bible has several references that refer to the fact of a time of ease that led to their moral downfall. And so again, you can see again how God chooses to use different trials and afflictions in our life. But again, our text shows us how to make that lemonade when we're handed lemons. The three imperatives that are given in our text is simply to count, know, and let. The first one is to count it all joy, and I believe everything else supports count it all joy. I believe he starts out with that one in verse 2. He says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations." That's the toughest of all of them, is to get to a place where you can honestly, from a heart, from a place of character, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, different trials in your life. Diverse here means many different types. He's not singling anything out. The only thing that's basically is eliminating would be sin. It means it can be anything from sickness, going without, financial struggles, work problems, family troubles, suffering, on and on and on. But the temptation here is not talking about sin. He's going to deal with that later on in chapter 1. But trials. The word even has an idea of putting to proof by experience. And remember who James is addressing. This is James, we're not certain who it is of the four James, but I'm convinced it's James, the half-brother of the Lord. There's pretty much not a doubt in my mind about that. But he's addressing, he is the pastor of the church in Jerusalem. There's only one church at the time of this writing. That's it. And they've been scattered everywhere, and he's the pastor that's trying to reach out to his flock. He knows the trials and what they're facing as they've been scattered throughout with all the persecution that is arising against those who have converted against Christ. They're facing strong persecution from their own countrymen, from the Jewish nation, because they have accepted Christ as Messiah. And they're also getting a lot of trials and struggles from the pagan world that they're in. So the group he was writing certainly knew about trials and struggles and suffering. And James tells them, listen, count it all joy. That's how he starts this off. Count it all joy. And this is important. Why do we need to count it all joy? We'll spend just a few minutes on here. I think this can change your perspective on it. When we see in Scripture, I see different men, as I thought about this, that did just that. That there are examples in the Bible of men who went through times of trials and struggles, and they were able to count it all joy. Paul did this when he was in the prison and when he wrote the book of Philippians in Rome. I mean, I think it's 17 times he brings up the word joy or rejoice. That's why he's in prison. He was able to count it all joy while he was sitting in prison, not knowing if he was going to be executed or not. The apostles got to a place where they were doing this in their lives, when they were able to rejoice when they were beaten for Christ. Christ talked about rejoicing during times of persecution in the Sermon on the Mount. One of the reasons why we need to count it all joy, and this is so important, I'm going to quote from Worsby right here. He gave a great statement about this. He said, outlook determines outcome and your attitude determines action. Listen, this is the importance of why, the necessity to get to a place where you count it all joy. Because your outlook of what's taking place in your life will directly affect the outcome. What attitude you allow that to control about you, that will determine what action you will take. And so the times that we're going to struggle most with a proper outlook isn't during times when everything's going well. It's during times when things are falling apart. When trials and suffering do hit, that's when it's important that you have the right outlook. Because that outlook is going to determine your outcome. Again, the point being, I worded it like this. If you want to end with joy, start with joy. If you want to end with joy, start with joy. I gave this illustration, again, I preached this message a couple years ago, and I gave this illustration, then I'm going to give it now. When we went to P&G with Matt and Rachel and Josiah and Jake, and I went snorkeling with Matt, and it was the very first time that I ever went beyond the breaker area there. I'd never done that before. A little bit in caving, but that was a little bit different area up there. And so we went out there, and it was just incredible. Really enjoyed it. I mean, everything we were seeing was just, sea life was everywhere. There was never a time you were not looking at something that was just amazing. And I was out about 20 minutes or so, and then I made a really big mistake. I was out about 20 minutes and looking around at everything. It was fantastic, not a problem in the world. The ocean was great. And I looked back at the island, and I saw how far away I was all of a sudden. And I went back to diving, but now that thought's really bothering me right now. But I'm just trying to snorkel, but it's not the same right now. I don't care as much about the fish. And so I looked back a second time, and I saw how far away. I was like, I am a really good distance away from that island right now. And the thought hit me. I remember it hitting me, just like it's happening right now, that if I wanted to stand up, I can't stand up. That bothered me all of a sudden. You know, like 10 years earlier, 20, I never would have thought twice about that, but it did. But I went back to snorkeling. But it's really bothering me now. And I determined I'm heading back. And so I was getting ready. Matt was about 20 yards ahead of me, so I went to catch up to him to let him know I'm going to turn around, and he dove down, and I said, forget it, I'm going. I turned around and started heading back. Now, when he got up, he saw that I turned around, was heading back, and so he was coming behind me, but I did not see him. I did not know that. And so I am heading back. I want to get back there as quick as I can. I'm not rushing, but I am straight on my way back. I don't care what I'm looking at right now. I don't care if you know, some blue whale went underneath me. I could care less. I just want to stand up right now is all I want to do. And so I'm getting there. I'm almost there, and my right calf seized. A massive cramp out of the blue hits. And so I went to grab that. When the cramp hit in my calf, my heart rate launched to like 4,000 beats every 10 seconds. And I thought, this is it. I'm dying right here. Why did I go anywhere with Matt? That was just a really stupid decision. And I thought death was certain. But I was able to get back, and as soon as I got back, it didn't matter because I was just getting pummeled and pummeled and pummeled at the breakers. But just think about that scenario for a second. Everything was just fine. Nothing actually changed. What changed was my outlook. And outlook affected my attitude and how I responded. When I saw how far, I was fine. I could have stayed out there probably another 4 hours. It wouldn't have mattered. But the outlook determined my outcome. When it began to bother me of my location in relation to the island, that affected my decision-making process. And listen, that becomes so important during those times of trials in your life because, again, your outlook will affect your outcome. That will affect your attitude and what action that you're going to take. And the word count here is a financial term that's used. It deals with value. And so, and this ties right into this. So what you value, all right? I'm going to make a very profound statement. Okay, what you value determines how you evaluate situations in your life of what's important to you. It has a direct effect. When Paul converted to Christ, he came up with a brand new value system. We see that in Philippians chapter 3. Philippians, I'm not going to turn there for time's sake. We have a lot going on today, the bus ministry, and yet I have a lot to say that I want to also finish quick. So we're not going to turn there, but when he came to know Christ, what he addresses in Philippians chapter 3, I'm getting around verses 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 or so, it's where he is basically saying, I got a brand new value system of what I viewed something as worth changed. And so to be able to effectively see value in our trials, you have to understand the relation and their importance they are to you in your walk with God. There's a direct correlation. It allows for a different level. You see that with Paul as he's getting on past chapter 8 into chapter 10, that I may know him and the fellowship of his suffering. All of a sudden what he saw was the value in the trials. He saw the eternal results of it. Again, if you value comfort more than you do character, trials will upset you. If you value material things more than spiritual, it will be awfully difficult for you to count it all joy when trials hit. Your outlook determines outcome. If you're going to be able to count it all joy, a proper outlook is imperative. So how do we do that? I believe he gets into that as he falls into verse 3. Knowing this. Again, he's supporting it. Notice how the wording is here and how the punctuation is. Knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. He's trying to establish value to the trials. And he says there's certain things you got to know. So the first imperative was to count. The second one is to know. You have to have an understanding mind. There's certain things that you have to know if you're going to be able to count. It's easy for me to get up and preach and say, count it all joy. But if you don't have the right knowledge behind that, those words are vain. They're empty to you. There's nothing they can do for you. There has to be a certain knowledge in place. It is the knowledge of these things that helps us to count it as joy. It's the result of right thinking and right knowledge that leads to the right attitude. So we need to look at what we need to know. As he talks about here, we need to know that God uses trials to produce patience in our life. This is directly dealing with our own walk with God and our effectiveness to be able to serve Him here on this earth. And that is what life is all about. The word patience here carries the meaning of endurance, enduring, patient, hopeful, a continuance. All things desperately needed in our Christian life. God does not put us through trials or even abandon us during trials just for the fun of it. He puts us through trials or will use trials to strengthen us. Job himself understood that in Job 23:10, where he knew he would come forth as gold. What he was trying to do to carry him through was a level of knowledge. There was something he knew that he needed to know of how God was able to use what was going on in his life. Right knowledge is important because it leads to right behavior. He knew he would be better as a result. And that's what James is stating here. He's saying, listen, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. There's other things I think we need to know as well. Look over in 2 Corinthians. Second Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 9. It says, and he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in mine infirmities. He's counting it all joy, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. What he did was he saw the value in the trials he was going through. The context is him praying for the thorn in the flesh to be removed, for God to take care of it. But the Lord told him no over and over and over, that it wasn't going to happen. And then it was knowledge that did affect his outlook, which affected his outcome. The conclusion that he came to was when the Lord told him, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. In other words, he saw how through this trial, how through this thorn in the flesh, how God could use it in his life. Paul understood how the Lord was using him. He was not ignorant to that fact. He wasn't prideful about it. Matter of fact, he relates to that in this chapter, understanding that it could very well be the thorn in the flesh that kept him in a place of humility in his life, humility so that God could use him. You want one way that God stop using you, just step up to pride. He began to recognize the importance of the trial in his life. And once he had that knowledge, it changed his outlook. Paul knew that God would give the grace that was needed, and so he trusted in that. He then desired for the trial to stay. Think of that. He desired for it to stay. He didn't want it to leave because he saw how God was going to use it. To be able to do that, you know what? You got to have the right value system. God will give the grace that is needed to handle the trials that we are going through. We walk by faith, allowing God's grace to sustain us through it. So I think we need to see, one, that God uses trial to produce patience in our life. And looking at all that word entails, it's everything that we're going to be able to need in our life to be able to say, as the Apostle Paul did in 2 Timothy, I have finished my course, I have kept the faith. We also need to know that God's grace is sufficient. I think another thing that's knowledge that helps us to be able to count it all joy is the truth that we have in a great verse like Romans 8:28. For we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose. all things. It's knowledge and being able to trust in God that even when something tragic takes place, that God has the ability to use it. He can still turn it around. Remember what Joseph told his brothers, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. We trust the Lord. He is in control. He knows what you're going through and what you can face and what you can't face. He knows everything about you, what you can handle and what you cannot handle. He knows how He needs to work in your life, and He allows trials to strengthen just that. I think of Abraham. Abraham was asked to sacrifice Isaac. Did he run from the will of God? By the way, the same principles, I can take you through person after person in the Word of God. You want to know what helped Abraham? Of course, it's faith, but it was the right knowledge. Know what he knew? That it was Isaac was the son that God promised. That even if he took his life, God would have to give him life right back. He understood that. So the right knowledge with his faith affected his outlook and determined what his outcome was. He knew God was in control. One of the instructors of the Navy SEAL training had said this. He had said, he was dealing with specifically the 5 days, the brutal portion of the training. He said, the reality is 90% of what they put them through is mental. 90% of it is mental. He said what they give them to do, they can do. He said they've already met strong physical requirements before being selected into the school. He said those who fail think they can't make it, but their body can make it. What you know about your situation is important. The right knowledge helps. In other words, what he's saying is those who fail, many of them fail. Why? They had the wrong outlook. They didn't have the right knowledge. And then we have the last imperative that is given here. There's more. Again, there's really 3 parts to this message, but I really think right now, with the Lord's leading, I think this is the only one I'm going to concentrate on. Verse 4. But let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. So there's a but here. He's not finished with how this takes place. This isn't something that's simple that we're dealing with. This isn't just really, I get tired of it many times. You see it on social media or shirts or something. Just nice little slogans. Just nice little phrases that are supposed to push you over the edge or whatever it is. Listen, the reality of life takes much more than slogans. It takes much more than just a cute little phrase. And that's what he's trying to develop within the text. So he brings up another imperative here, that is to let. There's a conscious decision that you have to make when you are facing trials. It's not just the knowledge. The Lord can supply the knowledge. You can hear the pastor preaching from the pulpit the truth of Romans 8:28, the truth of 2 Corinthians 12:9, the truth of James 1:3. You can see it. You can have that knowledge. But there's also a decision that you have to make. And that decision is to let. It means to submit. It means to submit. This is to submit to God working in your life. This is to allow God to do the work in your life. See, you can choose just to let it make you angry. You have that choice. You can choose to say, I don't even want to understand. You can choose to say, no, I'm just done with this. You have a choice. But the Lord is telling you, the answer is to let. To submit to God, to allow Him to work. There must be a surrendering to the will of God. God will not build our character without us yielding to Him. God's goal for us is a mature walk in our life, that fellowship and that relationship with Him. God builds character to that end. God builds character to establish a greater walk, which also enables Him, for our benefit, into a place of service. God, Worsby, I'll quote from him. I've heard others say it, but I did take this from Worsby. I'll give him credit for it. God works in us before He works through us. We see that throughout Scripture. God worked on Abraham 25 years when we looked at him. He was, obviously, we know how old he was before Isaac came, but when you look at a serious time of testing and things going on in his life, it was 25 years worth. before He gave him Isaac. God worked on Moses 80 years, basically, before calling him. 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in the wilderness. Now he's ready. He's 80 years old. God worked on Joseph for 13 years before putting him in a place of service that He had for him. God worked on the Apostle Paul for 3 years. Jesus worked on the disciples for 3 years, not counting what they went through after that time frame. The fact is, a mature person in his walk will not argue with God about His will. He'll look forward to it. It'll be done with joy. He'll do the will of God, as Ephesians 6:6 says, dealing with a Christian who's matured in his walk and has grown through some things, that he'll do it willingly from the heart. As God grows us up, He weans us. God uses trials to wean us, to get us away from childish things. David dealt with that in a short psalm, Psalm 131. But if you don't submit, if you don't let, the growth won't take place. It's not just the knowledge. It's allowing God to do what He can do through it. It's the letting. Many don't have growth as they should because they do not want to let or submit. We have to remember, God knows what's best, and on top of that, He loves you. See, it's knowledge like that that helps us get to the place of letting. And again, I remember when we did arrive in P&G, and the struggles and trials that had hit immediately, and that were very difficult. From all of a sudden no power, literally within minutes of arrival, to I had no idea we did not have running water where we lived. I didn't know the cistern had a hole in it, that there was zero water. Had no idea of any of those things, and having from boiling water every day to try and drink it when there's just no break from the heat whatsoever, and the cultural adjustments, the rats every night, it was just bombarded immediately. I mean, literally from 10 minutes of arrival. And nobody knows. There's no communication out. It's not like we're calling, nobody has a clue of what's taking place. And to see it, Marianne was crying herself to sleep every night. Never asked to come back. She never did that, but cried herself to sleep every night. Listening to the kids battle the different bugs and spiders at night, that was always entertaining. I know it was Michael Forrest. Did you give us the shaking flashlight? Was that you before you left? It was either you or Brother Matthew. It was you. And the kids were allowed to have those. That way they would never run out of batteries. They never have a time where they couldn't access a light at night because there's no power. But during the nights, especially in those first couple of months, every night I heard click as they were looking around what it did. I remember one night I went into the girls' room. They had a bunk bed set up, and this was like the first week. And they probably still know this to this day. I don't know if I've ever told them this. I did not tell them that night. I saw over in the corner like a bazillion little spiders. I mean, they're just like everywhere. I'm like, well, I'm not saying nothing. They'll never sleep in here again. I can't even tell them this right now. And I remember walking out and having a lizard literally waiting for me at 6 in the morning on the roof, and jumped on me as I stepped out of the house. Like he was just waiting for me. Yeah, that was fun. But we went through all those different things, and my outlook was not what it should have been. So no ministry was taking place. Wasn't that I wasn't trying, I was. I was trying to get involved. My heart wasn't nearly in it. I was just trying to survive. And yes, wondering, Lord, I don't get this. I don't. I don't understand this right now. And I did everything I was supposed to do. A couple of survey trips. And at this time when we arrived too, what was interesting is, of course, the area we're in, there is no other missionary, but there was one 5 hours from us, and there was one on the island south of us. And they were both on a furlough when we arrived. And I had never met either of them yet anyhow, but it would have been nice to have somebody else to talk with. But they were gone. They were in the States. And so going through that, the malaria hit. The very first case of malaria hit that February. We arrived end of October. That February malaria hits. We're going through that on top of it all. But then again, everything changed in a single moment of time. Walking through one of our trade stores right there and seeing that little bag of Doritos sitting on the shelf changed everything. Again, I remember seeing it and being so excited. Grabbing it, buying it real quick, running back. Everybody else, we had a kitchen outside the place. We just put a little shelter thing up. We called that our kitchen. And I had it behind my back and asked Marianne, all the kids are sitting there, what's my favorite snack? And she said Doritos, and I threw the Doritos. And they were the real deal. They were from China. These were actual snack-sized thing of Doritos. I was so excited. I ran back. I just threw them down there so I could go back. I knew the owner at the time, George, and I said, you had one bag on your shelf of these things. Do you have any more? He said, yeah, he just put out the one bag. He had one case come in his shipping container of Doritos. He never ordered the case. Never ordered a case of Doritos. He said sometimes they'll put different products in there to get him to buy them, though, is what they will do. And so I bought the entire case of Doritos right there. I bought them all and left and went back. But literally everything changed that day. I mean, at that moment, I stood in the aisle and I saw the Doritos. I remember standing there thinking, I knew the Lord was saying, I know right where you're at. It's all right. I know right where you're at. You know what that knowledge did? It changed my outlook. And that outlook all of a sudden changed the outcome. My attitude changed, therefore my actions adjusted. So, you just simply have to know the Lord is there. He is. He hasn't gone anywhere. We live in a sin-cursed earth. That's where we live. It's the reality of it. It's what we deal with day in and day out. There's going to be trials and there's going to be struggles. But we're here for such a short time. Our life is but a vapor and it vanisheth away. And it's gone. What we need is that biblical outlook of our trials. That's where you can get to the place where you can count it all joy. And then the Lord doesn't even leave it there. Because as you go on, know what He tells you what you're going to need next. And that's a whole other message. I'm not going to go there. Is wisdom for those trials. Because people make a lot of bad decisions during trials. So there's an essential time to get wisdom from God during times of trials. With heads bowed and eyes closed.